All right, everybody. It's going to be the third and final part of our chapter 18, Birth of the Modern City notes. Um, Hopefully, this one will be a little bit shorter, but you know how that usually goes. But the last two are really kind of long, so there's only a little bit left here. But a couple really important concepts to kind of talk about as we round out chapter 18. And again, you're going to see a lot of cause and effect. And I really, really hope, as we've been working our way through these last few chapters, that you're noticing, a lot of aspects of our modern society finally are starting to pop through, whether that's through new innovations and inventions like transportation and cars and stuff like that, or factory labor intensive type work, or even what we talked about in the last video with leisure activities and new sorts of amusements coming around, or spectator sports and things that we still enjoy in society today. So we'll finish this up, and then we'll be done with another chapter. So we'll just continue on. All right. So continuing on, talking a little bit more about urban culture. I mentioned in the last class, because sometimes I get these two confused, there's two authors that wrote a lot of books about kind of social issues and problems of the day. One of them was Stephen Crane, who I mistakenly told you wrote a book called Sister Carrie in class yesterday or today, whatever. The book Sister Carrie was actually written by an author by the name of Theodore Dreiser. Similar books, and I confuse them sometimes. He wrote Sister Carrie. An even more disturbing and depressing novel was one called Maggie, a Girl of the Streets, written by Stephen Crane. So just to fix that confusion, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, let's talk a little bit here about what the urban culture was like in America during this time and how it was emerging and changing. What we're starting to see more and more of are forms and technologies of mass communication taking place. And that's going to be really, look, the more we're able to communicate, and I say this time and time again, the more we're able to communicate, the more the world around us shrinks, the more we come closer together, the more things kind of make sense for, for people. The more we're able to communicate. So there's really a correlation between a modernizing society and improved means and abilities of communication. Okay, now obviously you know about the telephone and telegraph wires and things like that, but we're also seeing a big, massive amount of growth in newspapers and information reporting. And the two biggest names associated with this are William Randolph Hearst, who owned a lot of newspapers, and Joseph Pulitzer, who owned a lot of newspapers as well. If you've heard of the Pulitzer Prize that is given every year for a variety of things, it's named after Joseph Pulitzer. And in fact, it was Joseph Pulitzer who really helped bring the Statue of Liberty to the United States. But these men are largely responsible for creating the tabloid. And a tabloid is kind of a collection of newsworthy stories, but then also a lot of stories that are semi-fictitious or exaggerated, but yet serve a public interest as stories that are going to sell papers, so to speak. And the more papers you can sell, the more information you can get out to the masses, the more you can communicate with people. Okay? This format is something that we call yellow journalism. And by definition, yellow journalism is exaggerated news stories meant to lure and engage readers, or enrage readers either. Now today some people may refer to that as fake news, but it's really not necessarily. There's a difference between all-out fake news and stories that are made to be a little bit more than what they are. Okay, as with anything else, newspapers are about making money. So if I can put a really crazy tagline on or a headline on a newspaper that is going to sell me another 1,000 copies of a paper, then yellow journalism says I'll do that. Essentially, it's like the 19th and early 20th century equivalent of clickbait. You see something that you think is interesting and you click on it, and it turns out it's really not anything that it was supposed to be. It's not quite as bad as that, but it brings about this concept is if you could come up with outlandish stories and things that are going to sell papers, go ahead and do that. It brings communication to more people and ideas to be shared more. Sometimes it serves the public good, oftentimes it doesn't. Um, in very much the same way, the telephone has a tremendous impact on American society as we turn into the 20th century. By the beginnings of the 20th century, telephone lines are going up in more places all over the country. Um, More and more people have access to telephones. In fact, more and more people have telephones. So what this means is that people are much more easily able to communicate with one another. The phone was a great invention, but at first it's not practical because nobody has it. But as time goes on and telephone technology improves, eventually you lay cables across the oceans and create communication between the United States and Hawaii and Europe and things like that. These inventions are going to again shrink the world and make it a more close place where information and ideas get spread quickly, and it provides people opportunity for new advancements and things like that we're going to look at a little bit in the next slide here. So that's a big part of the urban culture. It's the ability to communicate with one another that sets it apart from other areas and has people in the urban societies advancing at a much quicker rate than other parts of America. What all this new America, because what it really is, as these cities start popping up and we're opening, building new skyscrapers and opening new stores and department stores and all these other things, and cities are growing in urban America. It really makes America a new and different place. And as part of that, we get a new artistic and literary movement, which is called literary realism. And this is where books like Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, comes in. Or books like like Sister Carrie that we talked about yesterday. Books like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Basically, what these books are meant to do is to, bring to the attention of people kind of the harsh realities of urban American life. As I talked about with Sister Carrie, how, it turns out that this life of fame that she sought has not brought her all the happiness that she thought it would. These books delve into very real issues that a lot of literature beforehand was kind of afraid to address. Issues like prostitution, issues like serious illness and death, and realistic portrayals of people. You read these books, whether it's a book like The Jungle, or it's a book like Maggie, or it's a book like Sister Carrie. You feel they're in very much a nonfiction format because much of the content in these books is taken from the realities of life. So when you're reading them, you don't feel like you're reading some fictional tale, like it's Harry Potter or something. You feel like this is, this is something that there's a real Maggie out there. These conditions in these meatpacking plants in the jungle, they're really this bad, which they were. So it brings this realism to people, in this very controversial types of books that authors really to this point hadn't really written very much of. And in some places, libraries and schools and cities, communities refuse to make available to readers because of the controversial messages that are included in some of these books. The other urban cultural dynamic that we have here is yet a new school of arts called the Ashcan School. It plays into this concept of realism. Ashcan School paintings are things like this, or just a picture of a street corner, and people talking at some bar, restaurant type place on a typical street corner, or like some of the ones that you would see in your textbook there, page 523. One of my favorite paintings is called Dempsey and Firpo, which is an image of a boxing match between Jack Dempsey, who was a great boxer of the 1920s, and this Brazilian guy named Firpo. I think he was from Brazil. But in any event, the painter George Bellows captures this moment as um, um, Dempsey had punched Firpo through the ropes, which he actually did in the fight, uh, and then makes this painting, of kind of the same image as a painting. This is what the Ashcan school paintings were all about, giving you not these beautiful frescoes of mountains and the natural beauty of the world, but instead kind of capturing, I guess, what the world looked like to them, the urban world looked like. Images of people doing things, sometimes caught as real things that they're doing, like in the case of Dempsey and Firpo, or even in this one pictured here, Nighthawks, I think it's called. Um, these paintings kind of just capture these images for us, in the new world of America, where it's not all this undiscovered territory that Thomas Jefferson had talked about, but it's instead this very populated urban place that has its own um, brilliance to it, I guess, in some way. So that is what we see with this. So let's move on. All right. So moving on to talk a little bit about Darwinism here to some degree. Now we touched on this a little bit last chapter. In terms of the concept of survival of the fittest. Darwinism, of course, becomes a dominant scientific ideology late in the 1800s. It's largely dismissed by a lot of people at first. Theologians, obviously, even people, intellectuals in like science-related fields and education-related fields too, were very hesitant to jump onto the ideals of Darwinism. But the misleading concept of Darwinism is that it doesn't totally say that God doesn't exist. It just puts into doubt the concept of how the creation story is told in the Bible. But we're largely a society that's not ready for that. So we see a lot of resistance to this concept. But Darwinism and the idea obviously was adapted by the wealthy and successful people as their justification for their success. But other aspects of Darwinism really kind of help to lead us into a more modern society. But it also creates kind of divides in the United States as well. And this first great divide that we see is the urban-rural divide in regards to people's belief or lack thereof in evolution. Over time, people in more educated, intellectual urban areas started to adapt and apply some of the ideologies promoted by Darwin in his, theories of natural selection and stuff like that, which essentially are just saying, survival of the fittest essentially means that, the strong will survive, the strong will thrive, and one is successful because it's stronger than the other. In other words, to take a popular quote, a lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of sheep. If it's hungry, it's going to eat, and it's going to do what it has to do to make that happen. But we start to see, really in this country, the growing difference between urban America and rural America. Urban America has exploded in size, and rural America has shrunk. Urban America has more access to education and schools, and more people in smaller spaces where ideas are shared and bounced off of one another, and ideas of some of Darwinist practice, becomes more and more accepted in these urban populations. While in rural areas, they continue to double down more on the fundamental long established beliefs of, biblical tie-ins and creationism and stuff like that. So we really start to see this divide in American society between the rural lifestyle and the more urban lifestyle. The other thing that comes from Darwinism, is the ideology of pragmatism. And beginning in the late 19th and into the 20th century, more and more of the practice of using pragmatism, which is essentially using scientific inquiry to come to better understanding of things. Scientific management is essentially, that we talked about, with like the assembly line and stuff, is to some degree the application of scientific inquiry to better understand problems. Who, what, when, where, why. What is your hypothesis? What is the synthesis, and what is the outcome? You put these things together and you help advance society forward. This largely comes to us from some of the beliefs, carried within, Darwinist practice. Really, it's time, the pragmatist believes that it's time to kind of get away from, whatever long inherited, long existing beliefs might be, and instead rely on scientific method and scientific inquiry to make assertions and move us forward. Now, you get the mixture of both of those together, it can become a very positive and useful thing. But of course, the idea of abandoning our long-held moral ideologies and principles is something that people are going to resist. Okay? But it also has a great impact on education. For one, we start to see more and more colleges pop up around the country, and especially in urban areas. Now, the economic impact of college education is going to be very significant because people are going to get specialized degrees in specialized areas, whether it's in engineering or medicine or business or law, which is going to create job opportunities and money-making opportunities for a lot more people. So the economic impact of higher education is ultimately going to be quite substantial. Another thing that impacts this growing popularity of higher education is the fact that a lot of these wealthy philanthropists, the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts and just about all of the other folks, want their names associated with, schools. So it's wealthy families that give us a lot of our, most well-known private schools, like Vanderbilt, like Duke, like some of the Ivy League schools, like Cornell and places like that. The economic impact of higher education here is going to be incredibly substantial, as it's creating more specialized jobs and careers for people, and thus more opportunities to make money. And colleges themselves, of course, are money makers. It also leads to advances in women's education. We start to see a little bit. You got to be careful about this. There's still not a lot of women going to college. And the women that are going to college, because the book talks about it a little bit, and the women that are going to college, tend to come from wealthy families who have, more opportunity for them to pursue opportunities in education. But for the first time, we're seeing, more and more coeducational institutions opening up, or schools that allow both men and women, though not a lot. And we're seeing more and more women go to college and get professional degrees in things. Okay? Now, the typical woman that goes to college is probably going to go to college to ultimately find a man, a wealthy man to marry. But there are some portion of these women that go to college and get degrees that end up not marrying and end up entering into, professional, entering into professional careers that they stay in throughout, and make a career out of it, whether it's in medicine or a legal profession or business related or whatever it might be. So we're starting to see that a little bit too, which is chipping away at this cult of domesticity a little bit more. We're not breaking through that completely yet, but it's more chips in the fabric of this cult of domesticity as women are now pursuing more opportunity. All right, and then finally, as a result of people using scientific inquiry, becoming more educated, we start to come to a better understanding of germ theory. Germ theory basically meaning how germs are spread between people in contact and how illnesses spread, diseases, pandemics, so to speak, and things like that. We gain a better understanding of germ theory. We start to come up with more inoculations and vaccines and stuff like that start to make their way into our society, or at least preventative measures, new pharmaceuticals and things to prevent illnesses as we get more of a better understanding of the dangers that germs can do. What this results in ultimately, of course, is declining mortality rates. So for the first time, we really start in the 20th century, we really start to see substantial growth in life expectancy as well, which is very necessary because as these big cities continue to grow in population, the likelihood of the spreading of germs and illness is only going to grow. So anyway, that's everything for chapter 18. So that's it, and we'll see you next time. All right.